viewer question and movies about Noah and his family prompts us to dive into the subject. This is Genesis Week. And welcome to this episode of Genesis Week, the weekly program of creationary commentary on news, views, and events pertaining to the Origins controversy, made possible by the supporters of Core Ottawa Citizens for Origins Research and Education. Excellence in Pirate Broadcasting, we answer your questions and question your answers. We continue to bring you the information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear, and giving glory to our Creator while doing it. We here at Genesis Week believe God gave you an intelligently designed brain for a reason. Remember, if you get lost in cyberspace, you can just punch in Wazooloo.com or GenesisWeek.com and you can find us. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel to get extras like Crevo Rants and full interviews with our guests. I'm your host, Ian Juby. Quite a few weeks back, we had a viewer write us on Twitter and I was unable to include it in the show until now. Yek is Science had asked us to talk about Noah and his sons. When I asked more specifically what they were after, they said, about if DNA shows we come from three people, the languages and evidence of it being the Tower of Babel, how all races come from three people. Thanks for writing in. Now, this past week, Paramount Pictures released official trailers for their upcoming movie, Noah, loosely based on the biblical story of Noah and the flood. Now, with big names like Russell Crowe, Emma Watson, Jennifer Connelly, and Ray Winstone, the movie will undoubtedly make a big bang on the big screen, although many are questioning how big the bang will be at the box office. Now, while we do not know the script or exact theme, we have been given hints by the screenwriter's own book and by some who've been able to read the script for the movie itself. So, when I say the movie is loosely based on the biblical story, even that is apparently being generous. Apparently, Noah is nothing more than a rabid environmentalist saving the animals from evil people, and even depicting Noah as being instructed by God to kill his grandchildren. As Hollywood producer Brian Godawa put it after reading through an undated version of the script, the problem is that Noah is depicted as attempting to follow God's will in the script, a will that includes the complete annihilation of the human race, as opposed to the Genesis depiction of starting over with 8 humans to repopulate and ultimately provide a Messiah. Godawa predicts a failure of the movie with wise insight as to why. If Noah is released and, as I am predicting, does horrible numbers at the box office after being rejected by traditionalist Christians and Jews, in spite of the studio undoubtedly hiring faith-based marketing companies to spin it as, quote, faithful, end quote, as well as mainstream viewers who will instead choose whatever feel-good movie is in the theaters that week, studio executives will gather in their suites on Monday morning and cluck about the elusive faith-based audience and how they never turn out for their movies, when in fact it was a movie made by someone outside of the community that was insulting, degrading, and contrary to their deeply held beliefs and values. The story of Noah and the Great Flood is a captivating one to both believers and skeptics alike. Even the skeptics spend ridiculous amounts of time writing web pages and books trying to discredit the Great Flood, claims we address on this very show. Noah's flood was one of the most significant planet-altering events ever to visit Earth, and the Noah movie will apparently not be even attempting to address what happened, whether or not it happened, or how. Interestingly, right about that time will be the release of the second book in Vance Nelson's Untold Secrets of Planet Earth series, named Flood Fossils. Also, our film, Mystery of Noah's Flood, will probably also be released shortly after the Noah film. Vance's book and our film both set out to explain the historicity of Noah's flood, how we know it happened, how we know what Noah's Ark looked like, and silencing the alleged criticisms of the veracity of Noah's flood, with evidence and footage taken all over North America. In spite of the apparent ridiculous deviations from the biblical account, the Noah movie apparently did get some things right, like what Noah's Ark may have roughly looked like. Now, though they depict the Ark as a bunch of logs stuck together, it was very much a box. As we will show in Mystery Noah's Flood, we actually have several reasons and ways we can deduce what Noah's Ark probably looked like and why. The shape of Noah's Ark makes a fairly large and meticulously detailed portion of Vance's book, as Vance is so good at meticulous detail. We also interviewed Vance for the Mystery in Noah's Flood, explaining how we know the Ark looked very box-like. We dive into the history of the debate over Noah's Ark, and where the idea of an old Earth got its foundation. Now, we had hoped to have the documentary finished by the end of 2013, but as is typical with most documentaries, it will take closer to a year or a year and a half to finish. However, we have been operating full steam ahead with the support of many of you. Now, we have a question for you. We have a segment of the film pretty much finished, complete with musical composition by our own Joshua Katner. Now, we're really happy with the segment so far, where we introduce Charles Lyell, the father of modern geology, and the first shots fired in the battle against the evidence in Noah's Flood. We want to know if you, the viewers and supporters, would like to see that segment in advance, or should we keep it as a surprise? Send us your vote by email, Twitter, or on the Mystery Noah's Flood Facebook page and let us know. If we post the segment, we'll post it to Facebook and the Mystery Noah's Flood webpage. Thank you for your support, and please continue to pray for us as we continue to crash on through this exciting project. Now, according to the Bible, Noah and his wife and his sons' wives got off the ark after the devastating flood which destroyed everything on the face of the earth that had the breath of life. They became the progenitors of the world's current population. But surely if Noah did this, and he didn't kill his family, and they actually repopulated the earth, then, as Yekis Science asked, there should be evidence of this. Historic evidence, genetic evidence in both humans and animals. Do we find any such evidence? Well, first, looking at it historically, there is loads of evidence of a worldwide flood and Noah and his family. Over 250 cultures worldwide have legend, record, or mythology of a worldwide flood. Now, this is staggering in and of itself. Imagine being the first to communicate with an isolated tribe in a jungle deep in the Congos of Africa, and after learning their language, you discover they have a story of a worldwide flood in which a very few of their ancestors were saved on board a floating vessel with a whole pile of animals. How did these people get this story passed on for generations when they've been isolated from the rest of the world? But now virtually every culture in the world is like that. That single fact is powerful evidence for the historic worldwide flood. We have all descended from Noah and his family, so it makes sense that we would all have remnants of that history in our culture. But even more specific is historical documents. Bill Cooper in his book After the Flood reveals amazing historical document after historical document. Documents that were rejected only after the advent of evolution and liberal historians. For instance, in the Big Valley Creation Science Museum in Big Valley, Alberta, just a short drive north of Drumheller, you can see one of the very few authorized reproductions of scrolls from the Lambeth Palace in England. Edgar Nuremberg, one of the men who helped build the museum, obtained 2 replications, one of which is now on display at the Big Valley Museum. These scrolls from the 1400s are the genealogical history of England's kings. Now, genealogy was very important and meticulously recorded because that was how you proved you were royalty, by ancestry. These scrolls record the history of King Henry VI right through to Noah's sons Japheth, and then to Noah, and then to his father Lamech, right through to Adam and Eve. Liberal and evolutionary historians rejected such ancestries as fabricated. However, this fails to explain away the lineages for multiple reasons. For instance, other cultures in other parts of the world, speaking and writing completely different languages, also record history to the sons of Noah. Now, there are gaps in the records, but the names appear in multiple languages and multiple cultures, with the same names in the same sequence. Now, this makes complete sense because we are all descended from the same lineage, that of the family of Noah. In fact, Noah and the Ark and the story of the Great Flood can be seen in the Chinese characters, which are made of pictograms. Shin Vu et al. Described this in detail in a 2005 Creation Technical Journal paper, showing that Nuwa was undoubtedly the Noah by analyzing multiple flood legends carried by the Chinese peoples. Yes, the flood legend has been distorted over time, but even that distortion is a fascinating subject in itself that actually lends credence to the biblical account of the flood. The Chinese Great Flood, according to their legends, occurred during the legendary period. That's about 2500 BC, which is exactly when creationists would say the Great Flood happened. These Chinese pictogram characters come from oracle bones and bronzeware dating between 1050 years before Christ to as much as 1600 years before Christ. Now, obviously, this was way before any Christian influence, as Christ had not yet even been born. These pictograms reveal numerous details about this great flood, the man Noah, and 7 others, his family, including his wife, his sons, and their wives. The great ship, which had stopped upon a mountain after surviving a flood so great that there was no land visible, only the sun. As Nelson and Chang point out in their books, even the sacrifice made to God after getting off the great ship can be deduced in these pictograms. Other Asian peoples have recorded ancestral history preserved in their traditions that date to generations right to Adam and Eve. The Miao peoples have poems they recite at weddings and funeral ceremonies for reasons of association. Again, writing with pictograms not even remotely related to other languages like English or Greek, the Miao poems were around long before missionaries came along. In fact, it was missionaries who were fascinated by these traditions and translated the poems into English because they were understandably fascinated by them. The poems talk about the principles of their ancestry, right back to the first man and woman at creation. On that day, God created the heavens and earth. On that day, he opened the gateway of light. In the earth, he made heaps of earth and of stone. In the sky, he made bodies, the sun and the moon. In the earth, he created the hawk and the kite. In the water, he created the lobster and the fish. In the wilderness made he the tiger and the bear, made verdure to cover the mountains, made forest extend with the ranges, made the light green cane, made the rank bamboo. On the earth he created a man from the dirt. Of the man thus created, a woman he formed. Then the patriarch Dirt made a balance of stones, estimated the weight of the earth to the bottom, calculated the bulk of the heavenly bodies, and pondered the ways of the deity, God. The patriarch Dirt begat patriarch Sita. The patriarch Sita begat a son, Lusu, and Lusu had Galo, and he begat Lama. The patriarch Lama begat the man Nuwa. His wife was the matriarch Gobaluine. Their sons were Lohan, Loshen, and Japhu. The similarities of these Miao names to those recounted in the Bible are stunning. It's especially interesting to note the name of Noah's wife, as traditionally it has been held that her name was a version of Gwen, which is the root word for our English word queen. Names become distorted or adapted across languages. For example, my last name is actually Ukrainian, de Juby, with the unique Ukrainian letters which do not exist in English, being transliterated into English letters. And so we see similar things apparently happening with the name of Noah's wife. Gwen, queen, Gabaluin. Noah's name and his sons' names are more obvious with Noah as Nuah, Lohan would be Ham, Loshen would be Shem, and Japhu would be Japheth. Now, I had mentioned cultures around the world that have traditions, legends, and mythology about a great flood in their past. These Miao poems are another example of the literally hundreds we find around the world. Watch what else they recite as the principles of their ancestors. So the earth began filling with tribes and with families. Creation was shared by the clans and the peoples. These did not God's will nor returned his affection, but fought with each other, defying the Godhead. Their leaders shook fists in the face of the mighty. Then the earth was convulsed to the depth of 3 strata, rending the air to the uttermost heaven. God's anger arose till his being was changed. His wrath flaring up filled his eyes and his face, until he must come and demolish humanity, come and destroy a whole world full of people. So it poured 40 days in sheets and in torrents, then 55 days of misting and drizzle. The waters surmounted the mountains and ranges. The deluge ascending leapt valley and hollow, an earth with no earth upon which to take refuge, a world with no foothold where one might subsist. The people were baffled, impotent, and ruined, despairing, horror-stricken, diminished, and finished. But the patriarch Nuah was righteous, the matriarch Gabaluin upright, built a boat very wide, made a ship very vast. Their household entire got aboard and were floated. The family complete rode the deluge in safety. The animals with them were female and male. The birds went along and were mated in pairs. When the time was fulfilled, God commanded the waters. The day had arrived, the flood waters receded. Then Nuah liberated a dove from their refuge, sent a bird to go forth and bring again tidings. The flood had gone down into lake and to ocean. The mud was confined to the pools and the hollows. There was land once again where a man might reside. There was a place in the earth now to rear habitations. Buffalo then were brought, an oblation to God. Fatter cattle became sacrificed to the mighty. The Divine One gave them his blessing. Their God then bestowed his good graces. The poems then talk about the generations after the flood rebelling against God and building a tower, and God judging them by changing their languages. Again, stunning resemblance to the history presented in the scriptures of the Tower of Babel. The Miao poems then recite their generations descending from Japhu. The patriarch Japhu got the center of nations. The son he begat was the patriarch Gomen, who took him a wife called the matriarch Goyang. Their grandson and his wife both took the name Tutan. Their descendants are given in order as follows: Patriarch Gaundan Muan, Matriarch Kaudan Muju, Patriarch Jenku Davu, Matriarch Jinyo Boje, Patriarch Ganjan Nuang, wife not given, Patriarch Siguang, Matriarch Maogach. Their children, 11 in number, was each the head of a family. 5 branches became the Miao nation. 6 families joined with the Chinese. Notice that one of Japheth's sons was named Gomer. And so we once again see the obvious lineage of Japheth and Gomer in the Miao people's ancestral history. Now from Noah, we see in the scriptures a listing of his sons and 16 of his grandsons. Those sons and grandsons are prolific throughout history, as tribes, clans, nations, and landmarks were named after them all. We can trace the lineages of groups like the Slovak peoples to Magog, another one of Noah's grandsons born to Japheth. Another of Japheth's sons is Meshach, which is the ancient name for Moscow. You can even see the name of Meshach today, preserved virtually unchanged by time, in the name of the Mishera lowland, the region around Moscow. Now, I could go on at great length about the historicity of the sons of Noah, but I will stop there and encourage you to read for yourself on this fascinating subject at multiple sources, all freely available on the internet. Stick around. We'll be back in a minute
The Complete Creation video series is just that, an exhaustive look at the science, philosophy, and theology behind the creation-evolution debate. In this 12 DVD series, Ian Juby starts off with a 1-hour presentation for the children in God's Little Creation. He then follows up with almost 11 hours of lecturing for the adults as he walks you through the debate, starting at its surprising history and examining the evidence from biology, geology, physics, paleontology, and archaeology. Chances are, any question you have about the creation-evolution debate is answered in this video series. With open captions for the hearing impaired, the series is both entertaining and educational. There are also free resources, such as question and answer sheets and proctor sheets for homeschoolers. Order your set today online at Ian's Bookstore.
Before the break, we were talking about the evidence of Noah and his sons from history. So what about genetics? Is it possible for all of the races to arise from just 8 people? Well, yes. In fact, it's possible for all the races to arise from just 2 people. All the skin colors we see around the world are just variations of a pigment called melanin in our skin. Now, people can have a very wide range of expression of this pigment, from very dark to very pale. The physical differences are, again, just variation in genetics, combined with the influence from the environment and diet. For example, heavy brow ridges are prominent among the classical Inuit or the Australian Aborigines. Now, this has to do primarily with diet, as some of the jaw muscles go around those brows, and so a diet involving a lot of heavy chewing or heavy use of the jaws tends to produce heavy brow ridges. So even variations among the cultures are not necessarily because of genetic variation. Now, if there had been a worldwide flood, then there would have been what we call a genetic bottleneck. We have from creation till the flood organisms diversifying. Then all of the humans and animals are wiped out except for a scarce few. So, like our discussion of variation within dogs previously, a Chihuahua has had a whole pile of genetic variation removed. A Chihuahua cannot produce a Great Dane because all of the genes for producing a Great Dane have been removed. So now think of it like that, but on a large scale. A lot of genetic information gets lost at the bottleneck. From there, those scarce few animals then diversify again, isolating the genetic variation among them, so we get things like Great Danes and the world's most useless dog, the Chihuahua. It's the same principle with all of the animal kingdom, including humans. If such a bottleneck has occurred, we should be able to take genetic samples from the large groups of animals and people and see evidence of this genetic bottleneck. Do we find evidence of a recent genetic bottleneck? Oh yes, splendid evidence. However, it comes with one caveat. When researchers measure rates of genetic change, they assume evolutionary timescales of hundreds of thousands to millions of years. So they use those assumed ages to give a timescale to the number of changes that have taken place. So while even evolutionary researchers admit there's been a genetic bottleneck in animals, their time frame has been greatly exaggerated. For example, the human mitochondrial DNA evidence for a genetic bottleneck was obvious, but the date of that bottleneck didn't line up with observations. The researchers who observed actual rates of genetic change based on modern observation would calculate dates to the genetic bottleneck and get dates in stark contrast to previous studies which based their dates on evolutionary assumptions. Dates based on observed rates of change would be as much as 20 times faster than the rates of change needed for evolutionary speculations to work. In other words, the evolutionary researchers used their rates of change, which were built upon evolutionary timescales, a very slow rate of change which pushed mitochondrial Eve back to perhaps 100,000 years ago. However, During studies of the bodies of executed Russian Tsars, it was discovered that these rates of change were far faster than originally thought. Such re-evaluations can change the date of the mitochondrial Eve, as she is called, from 100,000 years ago to 6,000 years ago, perfectly aligned with the biblical time scale. So even the evolutionists have acknowledged the evidence for past bottleneck is prolific. They just have different dates for when the bottleneck happened. Dates which are built upon the premise of the evolutionary time scale, a time scale which is falsified in many ways and doesn't line up with modern day observations. Dr. Gene Leitner, who we had on the show previously, had published a paper specifically looking at one genetic change in pigment cells. The changes are too many to be accounted for by even 8 people coming off the ark 4,500 years ago. So obviously there are changes going on that we still do not know of as of yet. But let us also bear in mind that these people getting off the ark were only some 9 or 10 generations after Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve having the perfect genome, there would have been very little to no loss in the possible genetic variation available. So the genetic bottleneck, while visible in the genetic studies, would not have been all that harmful to animal life. Well, I'm afraid we got to call that a wrap for today. I'm your host, Ian Juby, signing off for now. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me again next week. You can send in your comments, questions, and incendiary letters to us in a number of ways. You can email us at comments@genesisweek.com, or you can send us a tweet at GenesisWeek, or you can go to genesisweek.com, which is our YouTube channel. Find the most recent show and post a comment there, or you can leave us a comment on our Facebook page at facebook.com/GenesisWeekTV. Remember those words of warning from our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me." We'll see you next week.
We are a viewer-supported program and need your support to keep this program on the air. Please pray for us, and if you wish to financially support the program, Canadians can make a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, K2K 2P4. While we cannot offer tax-deductible receipts outside of Canada, donors wishing to financially support the program can do so online at ianjuby.org/donations, and thank you for your support.